Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fourth time's the charm on this layout, I guess. And so I'm really excited to be bringing you Senate Bill 1978 today, which stands for the proposition that the government cannot penalize you for the actions you take or for the affiliations you have or donations you give to religious organizations. And it's really about the First Amendment and the Constitution. And a lot of people think that the First Amendment of the Constitution says we have the freedom to worship. Well, we don't. It's actually a little bit more nuanced and subtle. It says we have the free exercise of religion. The freedom to worship would mean that, yes, you're free to go to the church, the mosque, the synagogue that you want to and worship there. But the First Amendment is much more broad than that. And we know that because it's the free exercise. And in fact, George Washington in his farewell address said that morality and religion were the indispensable supports, not of society, not of church life, but of government. And so he understood that there has to be more exercise of religion than just within the four walls of a church. John Adams said our Constitution was made for only a moral and religious people. It is absolutely inadequate for any other. Again, understanding the fact that if you didn't have that free exercise of religion, then it was hard for the citizens to do and fulfill the calling to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then James Madison, you say, okay, then what's religion? James Madison, I think, had a great definition. He said it's the duty we owe to our Creator and our manner of discharging it. That means it's up to each individual person of the duty they owe to their Creator. Maybe you don't think you owe one, and that's fine. Maybe you think you do owe one, and that's fine. But then how do you discharge that? How do you discharge that duty? And James Madison said we ought to be free in this country to have that ability to do those things. And so again, we see time and time again that the free exercise of religion is not confined just to worship, but to outside the walls of the church.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Anchia, for what purpose?
Will the honourable gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for a question.
Not at this point. I'd like to get it through a little bit more of my layout, and then I'd be happy to yield for questions. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French philosopher, came in and he studied and observed America. And most of you may have hopefully read parts of Democracy in America, and there's a quote that a lot of us know. It said, "America is great because America is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great." And we know a lot about that, but we often forget or may not know what comes right before that. He said, "I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. In her fertile fields and boundless forests, and it was not there. In her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. In her democratic Congress and in her matchless Constitution, and it was not there. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power." And so Alexis de Tocqueville and others saw that America was great, America was good, and what allowed that? It was the free exercise of religion that empowered people to live the lives that they wanted to. And so we've had that understanding since the founding of our country. Since the First Amendment, we've understood that important principle. And what really brought this to my mind was a few years back, and there was a fire chief in Atlanta. His name was Kelvin Cochran. He was fire chief of Atlanta, did great things, was appointed by Obama to a couple of high positions in the Obama administration. And then one day he got fired from the city of Atlanta. And why? Did it have to do with his duties as fire chief? No. It's because he had written and was a part of a Bible study at a Sunday school class at his church that held contrary positions to what people thought that people of the city of Atlanta should believe in. So he was fired just for his affiliation in that Sunday school class and that Bible study. There's been lawsuits since then. There's been a settlement of $1.2 million to right the wrong that the city of Atlanta had. And I started thinking, okay, this is not right. The government should not be able to take an action against you for something you do in private, something you donate to, something that you affiliate with and are associated with. And then that leads us to this session. So I started thinking about that for a while. And then this session, I filed the bill. It's called the First Amendment Defense Act. And weeks after that, we have the situation in San Antonio that everybody has been hearing about, where the San Antonio City Council refused to extend a contract to Chick-fil-A, a very prosperous business, because they had given charitable contributions to groups that they did not agree with. And what were those charitable contributions? To the Salvation Army and to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That was the context of why they did not get their contract. And I got to tell you, I think all of us have been there around Christmas time when we walk by those buckets and we hear those bells and we throw some coins in there and put some dollars in there. I don't think you're discriminatory because you give to the Salvation Army. House District 93, where the Dallas Cowboys, home of the Dallas Cowboys, every Thanksgiving, they have a huge Salvation Army push. And so I don't think there's anything discriminatory about what the Dallas Cowboys are doing because they donate to the Salvation Army. So I want to make it very clear today. Look at the language in this bill. There is nothing discriminatory about it. There's nothing discriminatory in the language that you can find. There's nothing discriminatory in the intent that you can find. And I would show you that because from the original bill till now, it's been much more narrowed. It's been much more focused, right? And so that shows that there's no discriminatory intent in there at all. And I also want to look at the history of religious liberty here in Texas. We've had RFRA in place since the 90s. And I'm not aware of any kind of discrimination or terrible discrimination that we've seen in that time. We passed the Pastor Protection Act by Representative Scott Sanford a couple sessions ago, unanimously, I believe. And since then, we've not seen any examples of discrimination there. Last session, James Frank did a great job on the Freedom to Serve Kids Act with foster care families and adoption agencies. In those 2 years, we have yet to hear any discriminatory effects of those religious liberty bills. We even added religious liberty conscience protections to pharmacists, to lawyers, to nurses last session on sunset bills, and we've yet to see any discriminatory impact or effect on any of those. So, the last thing I want to say, and then I'm happy to yield for questions, that we hear a lot of times in this chamber that y'all means all. And I agree. And that all includes Chick-fil-A, it includes the Salvation Army, it includes the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and those who donate to them, are affiliated with them, or are associated to them. And even if we put aside the constitutional moral questions on this bill, that's bad for business too, right? If we start seeing that Texas is a place where we discriminate against others just because they donate to certain places. And that could be very bad because Walmart and Home Depot both donate to the Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. You have people like the American Airlines and others who donate to the Salvation Army. And so we don't want to create a bad business environment to where we think that they come in here and just based on their donations, their private donations, that they're going to receive any adverse action from the government. With that, thank you, Mr. Anchia. I had 10 extra days to prepare.
Mr. Anchia, the gentleman yields.
Thank you for taking my questions.
Yes, sir.
And if we need to explore this a little bit more, I hope you would agree to extend. I know we're in the final days, but this is important from a constitutional perspective. I want to start with section 2400.02 of your bill. That can be located on page 3, lines 21 through 22. And let me know when you're there.
I think I'm there.
In my view, that is some of the core of your bill.
Yes, sir.
And I believe there are dimensions of this bill that have both a shield component and a sword component. So I want to explore both, if that's okay. So the language I'm most concerned about is the language that talks about or other support provided to a religious organization, right? That is not defined in the bill, is it?
The support piece?
Correct.
No, or other support is not defined.
Is or other support of a religious organization defined anywhere else in state statute?
Religious organization is, but I'm not aware of where support of
other support of a religious organization.
I think
so as a constitutional lawyer, as a lawyer, you would agree that may be subject to interpretation. So I want to get into some of the author's intent about what or other support might be, if that's fair.
Sure.
Okay. So since that is not a defined term, I'm going to give you a fact pattern. I want to understand what your intent is on or other support. We're all familiar with the situation of Warren Jeffs, correct? Do you know who Warren Jeffs is?
Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar.
All right. To make the body aware, he was president of a fundamentalist church for Latter-day Saints, not to be confused with the Mormon church. It's a different church. And they had a compound in West Texas. And it was Mr. Jeffs' belief that you can't go to heaven unless you have multiple wives. And Mr. Jeffs was later convicted on 2 felony counts of child sexual assault, for which he is currently serving a prison sentence. Now, Mr. Jeffs, in his defense, claimed that his conduct was done in support of his church. Because there is an adverse action contemplated by your bill, and that adverse action can be against any person if they are doing something in support of their church. So let's say Mr. Jeff gets out of prison and a school district says, no, Mr. Jeff, we are not going to hire you because you have been convicted of sexual assault of a minor. How does this bill impact that fact pattern?
Yeah, the first thing, you don't even get to that part of support because they don't fit the definition of religious organization under this definition. As far as I'm aware, and if I'm wrong on this, the second part that we have in the section 110.011 of the Civil Practice and Remedies Code define religious organization. The second piece is it does not engage in activities that would disqualify it from tax-exempt status under section 501c3 of the IRS Code.
And do you know that to be the case of this church?
I don't know, but I would think that any criminal activity would not allow that, but we also
would
have
that include the Catholic Church, for example? Well, criminal activity has been found, including a raid.
Representative Chief,
is that the litmus test?
Mr. Schaefer raises a point of order. The gentleman's time has expired. The point of order is well taken and sustained.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Anchia, for what purpose?
I'd like to extend the gentleman's time. I know it's late in the session, but this is an important bill.
Extensions are not allowed in the last 10 days of the session, Mr. Anchia.
Even upon a vote, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker?
Please state your inquiry.
Does that include upon a vote of the members?
The rule says it may not be extended.
I know, Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Can it be extended on upon unanimous consent?
The rules say it cannot be extended.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.